Topping today's news, the government tables its national investment bill. Great news for people in the country suffering from kidney failure. Club Med on San Salvador bouncing back with a bang. The immigration minister fires back after former Deputy Prime Minister Simonet comments on the influx of illegal migrants, and Prime Minister Davis defends his trip to Bermuda. Evening, Bahamas. I'm Jareno Saunders. This is your JCN Evening News. It's a pleasure to have you join us. Minister of Finance, Prime Minister Philip Davis, tabled the National Investments Fund bill in the House of Assembly this morning. The Prime Minister noted that modernizing big investments in food security and transforming how we generate, store, and transmit energy is not things that can be done cheaply and all require enormous levels of investment. With that in mind, the Prime Minister says government must do things smarter and better than it did in the past. The National Investments Funds bill, according to Prime Minister Davis, allows the Bahamas to maximize its assets while investing and deploying our own capital to expand access to additional capital and opportunities.
The National Investment Funds bill sets up for the first time in our country a clear regulatory framework for such arrangements. We are doing so in line with the recommendations made by the IDB, which advise setting up investment funds and vehicles to deal with national investment revenue and expenditure in a way that is transparent and in line, both from a structural and governance point of view, with international best practices.
This, according to Prime Minister Davis, is an essential first step in taking a comprehensive approach to national investment. He contends that the new framework brings together a number of different strands of government fiscal operations relating to investments, thereby putting them into properly structured entities that can forge partnerships with the private sector, which can in turn be effectively, efficiently, and transparently managed in the national interest.
The bill has two main objectives. The first objective is to authorize the establishment of national investment funds for the purpose of advancing the blue, green, and orange economies of the Bahamas. The second objective is to provide for the effective and transparent management of the natural resources of the Bahamas, along with private investments held by the government of the Bahamas. In order to achieve these objectives, funds created pursuant to this bill are designed to ensure that investments and private shareholdings of the government are managed professionally for the short, medium, and long-term benefit of the citizens of the Bahamas. The prescribed fund structure is also designed to ensure that revenues from the assets of the Bahamas will contribute to the economic certainty of the country.
Prime Minister Davis says upon passage of the National Investment Funds bill, the government will immediately proceed with the formation of the Bahamas Resilient Infrastructure Fund, which would cause this administration to have fulfilled its commitment to create a fund promoting partnerships for the development and, in many instances, redevelopment of Family Island infrastructure. The Ministry of Health and Wellness aims to perform 10 kidney transplants by the end of 2023 with the implementation of a living donor kidney transplant program in the Bahamas. Minister of Health and Wellness Dr. Michael Dovell, along with Permanent Secretary Colin Higgs and other health officials, recently met with Bahamian physicians Dr. Rhea Thurston Carroll and Dr. Vantario Taylor, along with members of the international nonprofit organization Transplant Links Community, or TLC. They traveled to Cuba to speak with doctors at the Renal Transplant Center in Havana in preparation to launch this initiative. A statement from the Ministry of Health and Wellness on Tuesday said the initiative will be made possible by legislative amendments to the Drug Prescription Act to make the anti-rejection medication readily available at no cost to patients. In September, Cabinet gave approval for the ministry to commence a hospital facility assessment by TLC, which resulted in a satisfactory satisfactory report with recommendations for upgrades to some instruments and additional needs assessments for the kidney transplant program to be successful here in the Bahamas. The statement adds that while dialysis remains a viable option for kidney failure treatment, this living donor program would give patients an improved quality of life and cost burden relief to the healthcare system. The kidney transplant program is expected to be facilitated through the Princess Margaret Hospital. After nearly 3 years, Club Med Columbus Isles on San Salvador officially reopens its doors and welcomes guests to its newly renovated and reinvigorated property on Tuesday. Tourism, Investments, and Aviation officials in a statement noting that Air Canada brought in 120 passengers from Toronto, Canada to the oceanfront resort. Minister of Tourism, Investments, and Aviation Deputy Prime Minister Chester Cooper says it was a monumental achievement for the government, Team Tourism, and Club Med, adding that as the pandemic has waned, tourism officials have taken an island-by-island, sector-by-sector approach to reopening and reintroducing the tourism product and the brand to the world. Club Med will employ at least 300 Bahamians. As for more visitors to the island, the Deputy Prime Minister notes that Air Carib will be bringing an additional 200 passengers on Thursday from Europe, and Bahamas Air has plans to service the island with passengers from the United States. Member of Parliament for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador, Prime Minister Philip Davis says while Club Med put $5 million into the resort, he was focused on upgrading public infrastructure, with the government allocating $3.5 million to upgrade health clinics, water resources, the airport, and electricity supply. The Prime Minister said the impact of the reopening of Club Med to the economy on San Salvador cannot be overstated, as it is estimated that 70% of former employees have returned to work with the reopening, and those numbers will grow as occupancy increases. Club Med has operated in the southern Bahamas for 30 years. With there being much debate in the country concerning the Haitian illegal migration situation, which some say is spiraling into a crisis, former policymaker under the Minister administration, or makers under the Minister administration, have been making comments, including former Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs Brent Simonet, who suggests the current government should continue with the Commercial Enterprise Act that would speed along approval of work permits, which could help in the migrant crisis. However, current Immigration Minister Keith Bell is pointing back at the FNM, saying there are questions the former administration should be answering regarding the law put in place under the FNM. Cale Campbell has more in this report.
Though Minister Bell concurred with former Immigration Minister Simonet's suggestion that reducing the number of work permits issued is an option, he accused the former FNM administration of contributing to what they claim to be an immigration crisis by passing the Commercial Enterprises Act of 2017. The immigration minister cites the section of the act under application for work permits, where it claims any work permit applied for will be deemed to have been granted after 14 working days of paying the application fee.
Now, based on all of the comments made in the media recently about there being a crisis in the Abacos and in the Bahamas, I would submit that the problem of immigration is an age-old problem. We all know that we have our challenges and our concerns. But in the face of all of this, we have had the former administration pass the Commercial Enterprises Act in 2017, which mandated that in 14 days of the date of an application, the work permit will be issued regardless of due diligence. I know, having sat as in the chair of now as the Minister of Immigration, that it is almost an impossibility for an application to be submitted today, and within 14 days that we would have done, Immigration Department would have done its due diligence. It is impossible.
Minister Bell highlights the fact that it is impossible to do a thorough legitimacy check of required documents for a work permit in 14 days. The Minister of Immigration says he's spoken to Attorney General Ryan Pinder about repealing the act, something that Minister Bell insisted has to be done and that the act is still in effect.
But it has always been a policy of the immigration, and certainly this government, that when a person applies for a work permit, we have to ensure that they have a medical record. We have to make sure they have a police record. We have to ensure that a labor certificate is issued. We have to make sure that the documents issued are not fraudulent. We have to check with the country from which the individual comes. How could that possibly take 2 weeks to do? But this act is telling the Bahamian people that in 14 days, if the application is not approved, that it will automatically be approved. And so, to me, I think it's one of hypocrisy.
When it was suggested that the act was put into place to make facilitation of businesses easier rather than businesses waste a whole quarter trying to set up shop, Minister Bell responded saying, quote, "What is good for the goose gotta be good for the gander."
You can't treat one sector of persons who are making the applications because they may be wealthy, that they ought to have a permit in 2 weeks without due diligence. And because the average man, you or I apply for a work permit, I have to go through the entire process and is refused. There is an act which calls for the establishment of a commercial enterprises board, which the former administration never established. So therefore, the safety mechanism in the legislature, you're quite right, was never established. But yet, the law says in 2 weeks the permit is to be approved.
Very, very strong shock are the words the Minister of Immigration used to describe his reaction to comments made by the former Immigration Minister Simonet describing the current migration situation as, quote, beyond a crisis. The former Member of Parliament for St. Anne's earlier this week said the situation will only worsen if, quote, the can continues to be pushed down the road, adding that under his administration, raising the cost of work permits was not a deterrent.
Thanks for that report, Kale. And finally, in this segment, Prime Minister Philip Davis sought to set the record straight in the House of Assembly today when questioned by the official opposition leader Michael Pintard regarding details of the trip that he and a PLP delegation took to Bermuda last week, Wednesday. Since then, questions have surfaced as to what the trip was about and who paid for the trip after it was not publicly announced that the Prime Minister would even be out of the country. Responding, Prime Minister Davis first questioned Mr. Pintard's knowledge of the Westminster system in regards to travel when it relates to the office of the Prime Minister, suggesting that the opposition's posturing was much to do with nothing.
He is not demonstrating a clear understanding of Westminster system of governance. He used the word commingling in respect to the Bermuda trip. The office of the Prime Minister, I just happen to hold that office. I happen to hold the office of the Prime Minister. When the Prime Minister travels, he travels as the Prime Minister of the country. And the office of the Prime Minister takes care of the person, the holder of that office, including, if he's traveling, his police aides. If you understand that, and the Prime Minister is traveling, and the office of the Prime Minister pays the bill, the only thing that's left to do is to determine whoever goes with him, there'll be a reckoning.
When questioned about the trip on Friday, Communications Director in the Office of the Prime Minister, Latrey Ramming, said it was funded by the PLP party and not the government. Meanwhile, PLP Chairman and Minister of Foreign Affairs, Fred Mitchell, said the trip was official government business. On Tuesday evening, the PLP circulated a check and a receipt showing that the party reimbursed the office of the Prime Minister and subsequently the public treasury for the flight to Bermuda. Prime Minister Davis explained that things happened rather quickly in regards to confirming the charter flight, and it was only at the last minute he decided to invite members of the PLP. But once he realized that non-government members of the PLP would be on the flight, he made arrangements to cover the cost.
I said, okay, they could come. We had a 50-seater plane that was being chartered, and they came. So I then said, we will reckon. By the time that had been done, I had made the arrangements. And once I decided the PLP will join me on the trip, right, the arrangements for the charter had been paid for by the government. I then, the day I was leaving, I left instructions that my senior policy advisor, because of the fact that PLPs are going to be on the flight, to make sure that we will pay for the charter at least, and we make the arrangements. When we get into Bermuda, we will pay for the hotels
and we reckon and reimburse whenever we get all the receipts.
A statement from the PLP also notes that the Progressive Liberal Party will continue to share records of the reconciliation of any additional associated costs and payments. We'll take a break here. We'll be right back after these commercials.